Tonight, we look at allegations of fraud made by President Trump's legal team in several disputed states. And Thanksgiving in the time of COVID. How are families celebrating in these unusual times? So yesterday, Trump's legal team held a press conference during which they made some pretty strong allegations. Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, he said that once his team started investigating, what emerged was not a singular case of fraud, but a pattern that repeated itself across several states. He contends that for an experienced prosecutor like himself, that pattern would suggest a centralized plan to perpetrate fraud, especially in big cities. These are some pretty stunning allegations. So to discuss these allegations, we have with us tonight Rick Baas. He's the communications director for the Milwaukee County Republican Party, and Jazmine M, she's a Republican poll challenger in Macomb County, Michigan, and Guy Lewis, he's a former U.S. attorney. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Rick, let's start with you. You're in Wisconsin, and you're in one of the two counties that is going to have a recount. So you're in Milwaukee, and the other one is Dane. And there's about 800,000 votes that are going to be recounted. And in the state, President Trump is behind by a little over 20,000 votes. And I know there was a 6-hour meeting yesterday from the Election Commission to try to decide the terms of this recount. Can you just tell us the highlights of what came out of that?
Well, that was a commission, not the Milwaukee County Commission. That was the Election Commission for the state. And not a lot came out. They modified a manual. And often their guidance is viewed by many as superseding the statute, and that's not necessarily the case. And so at the local level where I'm at, we're going to go ahead and listen to those arguments, and where it does contradict the statute, you're going to find that myself, the lone Republican in the room, is probably going to go ahead and side with the statute. And my colleagues, who are all well-intended and good, honorable people, tend to follow the guidance. And we're going to separate the wheat from the chaff, and it'll probably wind up in a legal battle.
Oh, I see. So you think there'll be a legal battle even before the recount can take place? Is that what you're saying?
Nope. The recount has commenced. It
Okay.
started at 9:45 today, and it will reconvene again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So the recount has started. The legal challenges that are going to come out of the recount will probably, because the commission is consisted of 2 Democrats and myself, the lone Republican, we're going to agree on some things. And like I said, we're going to disagree on others. And as a result, the political representatives are going to probably make cases before courts sometime after we're done with the recount.
I see. Okay. So possibly something similar in Georgia, where we have a recount, but there's a contention that it just sort of replicated some of the earlier problems. Is it that sort of situation?
No, I think we're doing a little better than the rest of the country, because on our commission with the staff, we're working pretty vigorously to make sure we're transparent. It was a little rough this afternoon, but I do believe we're going to have those kinks ironed out. The facility allows for great visibility. We're streaming it. So the perception that things are going on outside of people's view is just not going to be the case here. And again, while we might disagree on the interpretation of the statutes or should we follow guidance, I think everybody's coming at it from a position of goodwill. And I'm going to vigorously defend our position relative to following the statutes.
I see. Okay, very interesting. So, and Jazmine, you were a poll challenger in Michigan, and you're one of the poll challengers who has submitted an affidavit in a case there. So can you tell us what you saw during the election? Why is it that you signed an affidavit? What's in it?
Thank you. Well, I was there for several hours. I went on Wednesday morning and left on Thursday morning. The intimidation, harassment, and discrimination that happened there it was out of call. I saw people, because we tried, all we wanted to do was see what if the process was followed the way it's supposed to do. We were there to check the check and balances between the voter list and the ballot, the envelope that they had. We were not allowed to do it, and actually, when we try, in my case personally, more than 4 or 5 times, they came to try to remove me from the room, and I was not doing anything that was not proper. I was even told that because even English was not my first language, that I shouldn't be there. I call it right away discrimination. I know the process. I was there doing my job, and they will not allow us to see anything. They will block us from seeing it. In another occasion, all the things that were done against the Republican challengers were intimidating. I'm not from this country. I came here 20 years ago. And to see what was happening there was concerning big time, because why will they harass us when we were trying to do our job? Why will they impede us from seeing what was going on when they didn't have anything to hide? We couldn't properly see the information. We were blocked. One of the occasions, police officers were brought to remove me from the room, and I was not doing anything. The only reason that I believe they couldn't remove me is because one of the officers was Hispanic. So I started talking to him in Spanish and telling him that they had been lied, and I couldn't leave a room where the accusations against me were false, and I will not leave the room. The more I spoke in Spanish, the officer started backing up, and it was I don't know how should I say it, but those people that tried to stop us from seeing the process and what we saw, it is my belief they should be prosecuted. Because you should not intimidate anybody. We were not there to intimidate anybody. We were there to do our job. The Republican poll challengers, there was a point that they didn't allow poll challengers to come in, but there were several Democrats with different names of organizations, but we know it because they had a green sticker in there, somewhere in their clothing.
So what did they actually say to you as they tried to kick you out? What was the reason they gave?
That is, I continue doing what I was doing, they will remove me because I was obstructing them from doing their job, which was a lie. I was aside. I wanted to see the voter list, and the person doing the screening for the ballots complained that I was too close. We all had masks, but she would take a long time to pass one ballot, screen one and another, and I was allowed to go in and out, and I was doing it, but they didn't like it. They didn't like my presence there, and that is when they started coming and trying to stop me from being there. It was obvious that they literally hate my presence there, because I also, with all the things that were going on and with them not allowing us to challenge anything, I was advised to challenge every ballot that they were processing. That didn't go well with them. It made my job harder, but I stood my ground. I was not doing anything wrong.
So in the ballots that you were able to challenge, did you see, what were you challenging? Did you see something problematic?
There were cases where the ballot will not have the number on top that identifies the ballot with the voter. There were also times when they were entering information manually. I know the case of the January 1st, 1900, that called my attention, and I know there have been some people that claim, but they needed to give a number. When I challenged that, the chairperson told me, well, we needed to do it. And I said, no, I mean, in any common sense person, doesn't make sense that you are entering the information for a voter with a name, address, and a day of birth that is false. That should not be allowed. They didn't care what anything that I challenged. They will say, we are not going to stop. We will keep moving. We are not accepting any challenge. So I wrote down everything. I took notes, 36 pages of notes, with everything that common sense tells you is I file a registration giving the day of birth, January 1st, 1900, people are going to come after me. Why was nothing done there to stop that?
I see. Okay, thank you. So, Guy, one of Giuliani's allegations, well, you know, his main contention is that the pattern that actually a lot of the things Jazmine just described was described at a lot of the problematic counties where, you know, Republican poll watchers or challengers were intimidated. They couldn't physically, they were too far to physically see the screens, that the problem with separating the signatures from absentee ballots, no one able to verify that. Do you see that there's a case for some sort of systematic, too consistent to be an accident voter fraud going on here? What does it look like from your seat?
So good question, Cindy. As a former prosecutor, I put on my prosecutor hat and I look at this. And the short answer to your question is probably. Now I know that's not a satisfying answer, a typical lawyer answer, but it's fascinating listening to both Rick and Jazmine because they're coming at this from two different ways, and it sort of indicates the two issues. You've got procedural kind of objections that are occurring. For example, Jazmine is saying, look, we want to be closer. We want to see. We want to observe. We have a right to be here. And then you have sort of the substantive, the substance. For example, the allegation that, hey, there are either people that shouldn't be voting or there are overvotes. In other words, you heard Giuliani talk about that more votes are being counted than actually people registered. You heard Giuliani talk about how the Dominion program was being manipulated in Biden's favor. You heard a lot in terms of just issues and problems that Giuliani was raising, mainly circumstantial as opposed to direct eyewitness testimony, which as an ex-prosecutor, we always like to see eyewitness testimony like Jazmine. But in terms of getting us over the finish line, I just think they've got a tough row to hoe right now.
Is proving that there was something systematic going on, that the pattern was too consistent, is that crucial to building their case, do you think?
Well, I've tried to take a step back and look at this objectively because I've advocated from the very beginning that the president should have every opportunity through the recount system, through the contested local system like what Rick is talking about. And, you know, I've advocated in favor of that. But I guess my problem with Giuliani's approach is we're now seeing sort of this shotgun where we're sort of saying, okay, there's a little bit here, there's another problem here, there may be problems there. And I'm all for him having the opportunity to prove up his case. But as sort of Rick suggested, you're going to see lawsuits, and at some point the judge is going to look down at Giuliani and say, okay, call your first witness. Put on your evidence. And you've got to prove up. You've got the burden of proof. The president's got the burden of proof. And yes, you can argue that there are violations that are going on, like Jazmine is talking about, and some of these razor-sharp districts. But again, I go back to Florida, 2000, Florida recount. You know how many votes that involved? That there was a discrepancy, and The Supreme Court ultimately stopped the recount. 600 votes.
Yeah.
So
very-
at the end of at the end of the day, the president's he's got a tough row to hoe here.
All right,
but
we've
I
got to
think
wrap up there. So sorry to cut you off, but we've got to wrap up. Oh, very, very quickly, Rick.
In Wisconsin, if the statutes are followed, the president doesn't have a tough row to hoe. Instead of following guidance that's in contradiction to the statute, the president is easily going to be within the margin. The question is once it gets to the court, will the courts do the right thing?
All right, very interesting. Well, we'll definitely be watching all of these states extremely closely, and we'll see what happens, and maybe you can all come back and give us an update. Thank you so much for joining us.
May I
Thank you.
say something?
I think we've got to wrap up. I'm sorry. I've already gone over time, so sorry.
Well, nobody talked about the sealing of the boxes, and I was there when they were doing it.
Okay. Is that part of your affidavit as well?
Correct. And if we didn't request them to seal the boxes, many of those boxes would have left the place without being sealed. Whether they did it purposely or not, that was not right. And it will not go through my supervision leaving those boxes. Why will so many unsealed boxes were leaving the... I was at the...
Okay, I've got to wrap up here.
DCF Senate wing.
Sorry to cut you off. Okay, thank you all so much. All right, and coming up after the break, Thanksgiving and the time of COVID. But first, to warm us up, here's America Q&A.
I'm going to just enjoy Thanksgiving with my family and forget the rest of what this nonsense is all about.
As of right now, I have no idea.
I just go on with life. I wear a mask when I have to go into a store or something like that just for other people. But me personally, I'm not worried about it.
That goes day by day, probably just very small family or just my husband and I.
We have a small group of family that we're planning to be able to get together with, but we're going to be cautious and definitely keep our numbers small.
Is to spend as much time with family and to be around as few gloves and as few masks as possible.
Food, chilling with family, and being so thankful for everything.
My wife cooks every Thanksgiving and the kids come over, and that's it.
Just be cautious, be smart.
Eating with my family, hopefully having a bunch of friends around.
Probably going to get together with my daughters and eat turkey and ham and some good desserts and have a good time. Probably play games with the grandkids. So.
And welcome back. Next week is Thanksgiving, and like most things in 2020, families need to make some adjustments. With us tonight are a few fellow Americans from across the country to tell us how their families will be celebrating this year. So we have Debbie Lucas, she's from Alabama, Dr. Sharon Peters in New York, and Carmen Estelle in California. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Good. So, Debbie, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us how is Thanksgiving going to be different this year?
Oh, my. Well, we've had Thanksgiving with my husband's family every year. This year, she's 92, and she has 6 children. One of them, of course, I married. And 2 of her children, both of the families have come down with COVID-19 here in Alabama and in Texas. So there won't be any Thanksgiving gathering for the first time since we've been married, which will be hard on my 10-year-old and, of course, us. So it'll be sad to miss that communion, with the whole family.
Are you going to be doing something via Skype or FaceTime or something like that?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yes.
That's good. And so, Carmen, how about yourself? How is Thanksgiving going to be different this year?
Well, it's only going to be different in the fact that, I'm in California. They have instituted a lot of lockdowns and, in fact, a curfew just recently as well. So the curfew starts on Saturday night. But the only way it's really going to be different is a lot of us people who are patriots and are really looking at the data and the numbers. We've seen the CDC numbers. We know that the illness is basically as bad as a seasonal flu. So we are actually not very scared of COVID, most of us. We know it's dangerous for people 75 and up. but they still have a 94.6% chance of surviving if they do get it. There's a lot of us that are just going to get together and have a nice picnic on Thanksgiving, outdoors, just a big sort of celebration of our country, but we're not going to necessarily adhere to the super strict standards because, you know, us patriots have been out every single weekend sort of celebrating our country and wanting to reopen our country now that the numbers are out, and none of us have gotten COVID, none of us have gotten sick, and we don't really know anybody who are sick. So we're not going to try to make Thanksgiving any different than it normally is. We want to celebrate our country, and we want to do it you know, with a smile on our faces and without masks. So that's what we're going to do.
And fortunately, you've got the weather to be outdoors. So, Dr. Peters, you don't have that luxury here in New York.
That's right. We don't.
How will Thanksgiving be for you this year?
So we will definitely be celebrating differently. We are having a virtual celebration. My husband's family is from North Jersey, and my family's in North Carolina. And in past years, we've alternated between New Jersey and North Carolina. And this year, we are going to avoid in-person gatherings at either place. And we have set up a lunch virtual get-together with my husband's family, and then a dinner virtual get-together with my family in North Carolina.
So you're going to be cooking turkey dinner in the whole 9 yards at home just with your family?
We are. So we've never actually prepared a turkey ourselves before because, like I said, we usually go to one of our families and they prepare the meal, Thanksgiving meal. So it'll be our first time making a turkey from scratch, and we're excited. It's one positive. We're going to learn something new this Thanksgiving and cook for ourselves.
All right. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
And Debbie, actually, I wanted to ask all of you are parents, is that right? So
That's right.
I'm sorry.
So I wanted to ask, how do your kids feel like something is lacking, or are you trying to help them, you know, not feel that way? Debbie, how about your 10-year-old?
Oh my goodness. Keeping him happy and avoiding depression has been really, really hard because I homeschooled him the first 9 weeks, out of protection, and then since the school was okay and there were no breakouts, we sent him to school just a couple weeks ago. So it's sort of like, you just wait. It's like a waiting game. And my husband has never stopped working. You don't know if they're going to bring it home, or it's scary. It really is. It really, really is. It's scary to think about. I have a system, and so I have to be particularly careful. So it's tough. It's really hard, especially keeping him happy. But we're doing that. He's at basketball now.
Oh, good. So, and how about you, Carmen? What age are your children?
I have one daughter. She's 9, and what we do is we're data people. We look at data, and we have a lot of doctor friends and scientist friends, virologist friends, and they've all told us the same thing. This is no worse than the seasonal flu. We now know the numbers. The numbers are all in. And so honestly, we're not living in fear. We do not live in fear over here. We know that hopefully everybody will just be able to go back to normal very soon. I don't know why the continued lockdowns with the numbers the way they are. Other states that don't have lockdowns, like South Dakota, do not have the numbers that California has, and they're actually doing better than we are. So there's something really amiss here. So we're not living in fear. My daughter's not living in fear. She believes strongly in her immune system and in faith over fear, and that's the way we're keeping it over here in our household.
And Dr. Peters, how about yourself? I guess you still have a practice, so you're seeing patients, and you've got 2 sons, is that right? How are things in your household?
That's right. I have a 3-year-old and 5-year-old son, and they are, they're as happy as they can be. My 3-year-old really has had a great year overall. He's had a lot of one-on-one time with his brother, who was in school prior to this year, and we are. They're doing virtual learning with a teacher at home, and they're both adjusting fairly well to the changes that we've had to enforce. So I work in primary care, so I've been caring for COVID patients. I lost 3 patients in the beginning of the pandemic, 3 young, healthy people. And so since that time, have been very, very cautious about spreading COVID because while the majority of young, healthy people do well, it's unspeakable when a 25-year-old is in the ICU and there's nothing that we can do. So.
I understand. All right, so let's finish up with maybe some Thanksgiving wishes. What are you thankful for this year, Debbie?
Oh my goodness. I'm thankful that none of us have gotten sick. And I'm thankful for the safety that that my husband has embraced. It took a little while to get him to get there, but so I'm thankful for that, and that we're still keeping Rhodey active and out there in the community with his friends and so forth. But we're being very careful.
All right, and Carmen?
I think this year I'm most grateful that we were all kind of put in this timeout. America, the world is kind of on a timeout. And for that, what it brought me was actually brought me closer to God. It made me more spiritual. So I'm very grateful for that. And I've actually never been more strong, more faithful in my entire life. So that's the main thing I'm faithful for, of course, my family and friends and this beautiful country. And I just want to see it get back on its feet as soon as possible. So let's pray for that.
Thank you. And Dr. Peters, how about yourself?
I'm definitely thankful for my family, for my husband and my children, and the wonderful quality time that we've had this past year with very few distractions. It's definitely a year like no other. And I'm also grateful for all the medical advances and developments that are really helping us slowly to get a grip on this pandemic.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and happy Thanksgiving to you and your families.
Thank you all. Happy Thanksgiving.